All right, so let's go ahead and let's make a background object here. Now, this background object is going to be a rock. Now, this is one thing you probably haven't considered, but when you make something in Blender, you get a little bit better. And if you do it a lot, well, you get a lot better. So let's go ahead and let's make some background objects. Background objects are a great way to add in and essentially do as much as you can while learning the fundamentals in Blender. So one thing we're going to do is we're going to add in a modifier, and modifiers will take some of the hassle out of modeling. Okay, so what we're going to do is we're going to add in a modifier, and the modifier we're going to be using is the subdivision surface modifier. And whoa, that actually had done quite a bit to your model here. Okay, and if you push it up a couple times, well, that's you can see that it's almost like a sphere. Now, this here is not, we haven't actually set this into working here. As you can see here, we have a box, and within that box is the actual object. It's not until you push apply until those faces actually get rendered here. And by the way, if you're wondering, this isn't a sphere. It's almost a sphere. But spheres are just made up of these little faces, and the more faces you have, the more detailed the sphere. So that's something that's interesting. Now let's also take a look here at what other modifiers we can do. Well, the other modifier that we want to use is this decimate here. Now, we can take this ratio and you can see that this decimate, well, it just essentially makes the object less detailed. But it does it in such a cool way, in my opinion. Okay, so what we're going to do is we're going to go and simply kind of make something more like this. We don't want too many faces because you'll see why in just a second here. And I think that's probably good, just like that. Okay, let's go ahead and let's push apply and tab into to edit mode here. Okay, and one thing you can do is if you push, for example, the right mouse button, you can select all the faces. So what we want to do is we want to select all the faces at the top here. Now, this, of course, is going to be a background rock because rocks are super important. You see them pretty much anywhere. And what I'm going to do is I'm just going to simply move it down. Okay. And you can add in more faces if you wish to this. Okay. And to a certain extent, we could almost leave it right here, but we want something a little more flat. So I'm just going to take all of this and just move it around and move it down a bit more. Okay. And then we can take some of the top here, just the top, and kind of move that down and take some of these tops here. Now, one thing you have to understand about anything that's kind of artistic is that sometimes you kind of just do things and you hop in the program and you make your art, and it's not every single move is 100% intentioned. So here and it's something that was really hard for me to understand actually. So one thing I'm going to do is I'm just going to move this up as much as I can. And if you see that there's some extra vertices here, we just want to make this as flat as we can. Now, again, what you're thinking here is, well, this is really simple. And yeah, that's exactly what a rock would kind of look like. Now, if we tab into object mode, that actually looks pretty good. Now, if we hop over to the material here and we take a look at the diffuse, we can change it to whatever color we want. Now, if we make it into, let's say, a brown, which, a lot of rocks are kind of brownish, and a brown is just a dark orange, so we can kind of move it down here. Now, when it comes to any kind of color, what happens if your rocks are blue or green or purple or white? I mean, that actually, rocks are usually gray or brownish, right? So, for example, what happens if your rock is a different color? How does that add to the scene here? So that is a very simple rock. Now you can repeat this process a few times, and what that will do is that will make you good at the process here. Now, again, one other thing that isn't obvious, or is obvious but always should be mentioned, is that when you're making games, you have what we call a poly count, and a poly count is how much detail you can have in your scene. Now, the less complex the hardware, the less poly count you can have. So you don't want your rocks to be super detailed because they're, well, background objects. You want your main character to be fairly detailed because that's what the player is going to be looking at. So if you want to do that, you want to make sure that you always, always, always are conscious of the poly count. Now, even if you're making a game for like a modern console or PC, for example, like the Xbox One or your PC, you still have to be conscious of poly count. It's something that's always, always ever present. This includes the tutorial.